Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for coming and joining this morning. Please feel free to get up and continue helping yourselves to refreshments, breakfast, brunch. And the bathroom is downstairs if you need it. And if you need to filter in and out, that's totally fine. This is a more informal meeting, and I'm grateful to have all of you here. The purpose of this is to provide some education about Rico Geothermal, and we are blessed to have three amazing presenters with us today, who I'll be introducing as we get started. To begin with, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Teal Stetson Lee, and I am the community liaison for the Rico Geothermal Project and the chairwoman for the Rico Geothermal Coalition. And the Rico Geothermal Project is supported by the nonprofit, the Rico Land Collaborative. And I would like to introduce Skippy to share a little introduction with you about the Rico Land Collaborative. Hi, Garish, come on in. Hi, Dee, welcome. And actually, Skippy, I'll have you stand up the podium. I'll give a little more guidance for everybody too. There'll be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, and everyone can stand at the podium if you have a question, so that the microphone in the middle can pick that up through Zoom. Okay.
Good morning, all. Thank you all for coming. I'm Skip Zeller. I am the secretary of the Rico Land Collaborative, and primarily I'm here to support this operation. I think the potential for the geothermal project is it's an awesome opportunity for the community to come together and help manage that sort of resource. I brought with me, I have to read it. Our mission statement, Rico Land Collaborative, is essentially encouraging our Rico community's connection with place and local lands through the stewardship of intergenerational connection and regional education. The geothermal project, it makes sense. It's what I think we all need to do.
Thanks, Skippy. So this is our Rico Geothermal Coalition. We have myself, Todd Gilman, who's here, and I'd love for Todd to introduce himself since he's here in person too, please.
Hey, I'm Todd, about a 5-year resident here in Rico. Jumped on to help Teal with this a couple of years ago, and I'm just generally pretty excited about the geothermal resource we have that hasn't been fully explored or understood yet, and so I'm just chipping with it, kind of help move the ball a little further down the field.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. Alan, can you hear us on Zoom? I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I hear you. Hi, everybody. Alan Svoboda. I'm away today. Couldn't be in town, but nice to see you all here. I've been with the Geothermal Coalition since its beginning. So have a good meeting. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate that. And these are the rest of our members. Holly Brunkel, who's with us today, came down from Gunnison. She is a professor at Western Colorado University, and she's our academic partner. Masami Nakagawa, he was responsible for doing some very focused studies and research of the geothermal resource from 2009 to 2018, and he still works with us as a consultant. Dave Bolson and Michelle Haynes live in Telluride, but now also own the most well-known hot springs, surface hot springs that's next to the highway on the west side of the river, and they're part of our coalition. And then Tom Bulk, who's also a Rico resident. And that's what our coalition consists of. And now I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our first presenter. We have Holly Brunkle here, as I mentioned, and she's going to be sharing about Geothermal 101. And Holly is a senior professor of geology and engineering. And she's joining us because she's also working on a geothermal program and focus and getting that going at Western. Well, thanks, Holly. Let me share my screen so you can see this. And you can stand wherever you'd like. I think maybe up here, kind of in this corner would be a good spot for you.
So I haven't seen what the other presenters are going to present, so there might be a little bit of repetition in what our slides have to show. This is a short introduction just to the three types or the three main types of geothermal energy, and what the differences are. So geothermal 101. So for some of you, it'll be a lot of review. So for some, maybe a preview. And I took some when I was at Colorado School of Mines working on my PhD, I took some geothermal classes from Masami. And that's how I was introduced to teal 2 springs ago. And then he was just like, this is what you're going to do now. And I'm like, okay. And when Masami tells you that's what you're going to do, you're like, oh, okay. So the goals are just a few key terms, definitions, overview of a few important concepts. I don't want to take too much of the time, but why is geothermal important? Geothermal is a low carbon energy, and it can be used in a lot of different ways. When we're talking about geothermal, a lot of people just think of geothermal electricity production, and it's. Do I have a button? Okay.
No, sorry. Just give me a prompt.
Okay, I'll do
This gallery.
So this is talking about geothermal electricity and how geothermal power production can fill in the gaps for other areas like solar, which obviously is peaking in the middle of the day, and wind, which has its peaks on either end of the day, but where the top line there is the demand for electricity during a 24-hour day. And so there's a peak in solar before there's the peak in demand. And so where geothermal energy or geothermal baseline can fill in is where those two things fluctuate. And it's often called, you may have heard, the heat beneath our feet. That's from the governor's energy office. They've been promoting that kind of tagline. And it is the heat beneath our feet. There is geothermal just about everywhere. And so it's heat from the earth, and some people will say, oh, because our core is really hot, but our core is very far. So we're not really getting heat from the core. We can't get there. We're using heat that is stored in the Earth's crust. So within that top few kilometers, 10 kilometers would probably be the max. And so what we're looking for is where that geothermal energy in the crust gets hot. I think we all kind of know that it gets hot with depth. As you go down in the Earth's crust, it gets hotter. There is a general geothermal gradient where it's about, what are we saying? About 2 degrees centigrade per kilometer for the average for the Earth's crust. So we're looking for places for geothermal where that geothermal gradient is steeper, where we have more heat per kilometer of depth than the average. And I'm going to talk about the 3 different kinds of systems Conventional hydrothermal, which is on the far right side. Some enhanced geothermal systems, and then direct use, which is on the left-hand side, which is more shallow, more attainable because the temperatures don't have to be as high. And this is the gradient, geothermal gradient map that maybe you've seen before of Colorado. This is from the Colorado Geologic Survey. And you'll see down in the corner there, it's a high gradient right around Rico. How about that? So geothermal is happening just about everywhere. But how we use it depends on a few things. So there's three types: conventional or hydrothermal systems. Those are the ones that most people think about. You've got high temperature water system, you've got the geology, you've got hot springs, you've got Yellowstone geysers, those kinds of things. That's what people think of when they think of hydro or geothermal energy. They're thinking of a hydrothermal system. The other is direct use, heat pumps, low temperature applications that are accessible in more places. And then the last is enhanced geothermal systems, which are larger projects that are, rather than having the hydrothermal system in place, are enhancing it. They're making the system, creating the plumbing, I guess you would say. They are enhancing the heat transfer. Okay, so why isn't there more geothermal power, electricity generation from geothermal? Well, there's about 30 power plants that are geothermal. Some have been in operation for many decades, and some would say all the good spots have been taken. So the places where you have the heat, the water, and the plumbing all together that are the heat, the hot water is there at the surface. Those spots have all been identified and developed if they can be developed. And so geothermal power is really concentrated right now in the Western United States, because that's where we have the active geology, where we have the water, and where we have the systems in place for electricity generation. There's a lot of places that are under development for those enhanced geothermal power creation. And that's just a picture of the power plant called the Geysers in California. It is the largest geothermal field in the world. So oftentimes we think of geothermal, big geothermal power coming from Iceland, but this one in California is actually the biggest. And they have several production wells, I think over 100 even, I don't know. But it's been chugging out the same amount of power since 1960. And so pretty consistent baseline electricity for that part of California. This is the classic diagram of a hydrothermal system. So this has all three elements. It has the water, the hydro part, the heat, which is the magma or the geology that's providing hot material at depth, and then the circulation. So the plumbing following those fault lines. So water infiltrating, getting hot, and then having a conduit to get back to the surface as hot springs, geysers, and things like that. So that's a funny, I just think it's a funny diagram because there's that geothermal well and then there's nothing around it. Like, we're just gonna put this here. There's nothing around it. So there's nobody using it, but there it is on the diagram. This is another cross-sectional view. Same idea. This is the classic diagram of the faulted system. So adding in the cracks and fissures so water can infiltrate, get hot at depth, and then come back to the surface. So that is kind of the, what if you sliced open Yellowstone, what it would look like. And then this is the same diagram, just a little different, just a little fancier. But this one includes the injection well, so using cold water injection to get back into, to keep the system flush. But this is already, this has most of the system already in place. Some water coming to the surface as a hot spring. And then using that water to create electricity and then injecting it back into the subsurface. And then how does it create electricity? Well, it goes through a turbine system. The hot steam turns the turbine, creates the electricity. Then it goes through a cooling system and is hopefully captured and recycled through the system, so you're not losing that hydro part of your hydrothermal system. And over this is a figure that you'll see kind of a lot if you're looking around on the internet for geothermal stuff. It's a temperature thermometer gauge, and you'll see on the far left-hand side, that's where you get the flash, dry steam, geothermal electricity production. And it's in that higher range of water temperatures at depth. And then on the other side, there's a lot of applications that can be used in the lower temperature zone, which we're going to talk about next, which is the direct use, low temperature geothermal. And some of these enhanced geothermal systems are using low temperature water to create electricity. So it's enhancing that system through a closed loop, which I'll get to, I guess. So lower temperature sources in geothermal world are considered lower than 150 degrees Celsius. And you might think, well, 100 degrees Celsius is boiling. So how do we get water that's 150 degrees Celsius? Well, we're talking about water at depth in the Earth's crust, so it's under pressure. And so it's prevented from flashing to steam because of the pressure at depth. And so you want to trap that liquid water when it has its high temperature as a liquid, and then bring it to the surface and then let it flash to steam to create the electricity. So direct use, we all probably have done that. Hot spring. And then heat exchangers, ground source heat pumps, we'll talk a little bit about that. But again, I know just enough to be dangerous. I'm very excited about geothermal. I'm not an expert in any way yet. So, localized smaller projects, community developments like the one that is proposed here in Rico. Lots of things that we can be doing, capturing waste heat from industry. There are projects that are very localized and bringing in small generators to make electricity in a local spot from waste heat. And I don't know where, I guess in old abandoned mines, there's a ton of waste heat that's just sitting there that we could use. So hot springs, direct use. District heating is also considered direct use. And this is direct use, low temperature geothermal. So again, below that 150 degrees C. Greenhouses, so super low hanging fruit for geothermal. Production of food using heat from the earth to keep your greenhouse warm. And then aquaculture, like the Colorado Gators. How many people have been to the Colorado Gators? What's that?
Driven by.
Driven by.
Yeah.
So do you know that it's a geothermal? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a geothermal aquaculture where they were raising tilapia. But then the landfill said that they would no longer take the fish waste. And so they just started feeding it to alligators. So the Colorado Gators started as an aquaculture fish farm. What's that? And so then they were like, oh, we have to feed the fish to something. So they have alligators now.
Alligators in San Marino.
Yeah. You've never heard of Colorado gators? Yeah, and they just hang out in the hot springs there. It's awesome. Weird.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why they're there initially. And then it became, of course, the tourist part of it became the bigger draw. So this is also another pie chart that you might see a lot of. And I think is now older than, probably not as accurate. But in the United States, and this is the US, for low temperature direct use, district heating, space heating, greenhouses, aquaculture, resorts and pools, that makes up most of our direct use. And then back to that thing on the left-hand side are all the places, there's fish farming down there, greenhouses, food processing, agricultural, drying things, low temperature geothermal can be used for a lot of applications, not just hot springs, but that's also good. Just another example, the Pagosa Springs Geothermal. They have a series of geodesic greenhouses right along the Riverwalk. They're really pretty cool. And district heating has been done in other communities with great success and long-term success. So Klamath Falls, Oregon, Boise, Idaho, both put in their district heating systems back in the 60s, maybe even earlier, and have maintained that and kept it going. And seems to work for Reno. They're looking into putting in a district heating in Nome, Alaska. So even in places like Nome, Alaska and Gunnison, where it's very cold, heating with geothermal is a possibility. And this is where we want to go with Rico, providing Rico as a case study that can be replicated in other small mountain towns, especially around Colorado, where there is some geothermal gradient that could be taken advantage of. So a district heating map, this is just a really general cartoon of how that works. So you have your geothermal resource that starts at the energy station that pumps warm water in the winter months into buildings and infrastructure through the district. When the water is cooled, it gets pumped back. And then there's a heat exchange in that energy system, and it's a closed loop. So it just keeps going. And then in the summer months, you can reverse it if you need to. So it provides cooling in the summer and heating in the winter. And it's a nice baseline. So if you have a baseline temperature in your home of 55, then you're only, I saw all the wood smoke coming out of everybody's chimneys as I drove into town this morning. Then you're only having to heat from 55 to where you're comfortable because you have a baseline heat already in your building, in your home, in your municipal centers. Ground source heat pumps. This is available everywhere. So at depth, there's a constant temperature, and that's again that temperature that's constant throughout the year that provides the heating and cooling with the seasons. So baseline heating and cooling. And that's a little different than what we're talking about in Rico, because Rico already has the hot hydrothermal system in place, but ground source heat pumps can also complement that because of the high geothermal gradient here. And again, these are employed in Colorado. The example here is from Mesa. There's a building, the Escalante building, I think it's called, Dominguez Health. That is geothermally heated and cooled. In Gunnison, we have our county building is heated and cooled geothermally, and our engineering building as well. And then just real quickly, an enhanced geothermal system could be applicable here in Rico because of the high gradient of geothermal heat, where drilling more holes and whether those holes have water in them or are dry, the plumbing system can be enhanced. So you add the fluid in a closed loop and extract the heat that is there at depth. So, so blind systems, we, here in Rico, the hot water is coming to the surface because it was given a pathway by drilling holes. So it was sort of a blind system before those holes were drilled. And when was, that was in the 70s, 80s?
Crystal, Alex, you know.
70s, I think.
70s, 80s?
And
So they,
horrible.
yeah, they were looking for something else and they found hot water. And so they were like, neat. So that's a hydrothermal system that was blind. We didn't know it existed until it was drilled into. But that high heat is down there. It's down there at depth and has been mapped. And so this is a bigger project, but also not big spatially. It has a very small footprint. Drill some holes, close that loop, inject fluid, have the rock that's down there that's hot, heat it up, bring it back to the surface, create electricity. And that's what a enhanced geothermal system does. And this is the very simple one injection well, one production well, goes through the power plant, goes back into the system. And in this case, it's open, but for the most part, these enhanced geothermal systems want a closed system, so they're not losing fluids. So they can just keep those fluids in circulation and not be losing any energy if they lose any of those fluids. Fervo Energy has a project and has been approved for more enhanced geothermal power plants in Utah. And that's just one example. Again, it's pretty small footprint. Once it gets up and running, all of those things can get remediated, and it's a very small power plant. And in some cases, they use a binary cycle where the hot water heats up a secondary fluid, and that secondary fluid has a lower boiling temperature. So the hot water comes out of the ground, goes through a heat exchanger, goes back into the ground. Never interacts at the surface with anything else. It's just water going in a circle. And then that heat gets transferred to a secondary fluid that goes through and drives the turbines. So a lot of people, when they hear about geothermal, hydrothermal, they worry about groundwater. They worry about the groundwater resource. They worry about the volume and contamination potential. But if you have a closed loop and none of those fluids interact, that's one way to keep the volume the same going through the system and not letting the groundwater come in contact with anything else at the surface. That, and we'll skip that. That's fine.
Just a quick question on that last slide with
Yeah.
the heat exchanger.
Uh-huh.
So if you have a system where you've got a lot of fractured rock and it's under a lot of artesian pressure,
Uh-huh.
in a system like that, I mean, I feel like in where we have here, we have a lot of artesian pressure. We probably have a lot of fractured rock down there.
Yeah.
Is that a situation where, injecting it back down would take quite a lot of pressure to do that, and therefore a lot of energy to re-inject it?
So if you're injecting and extracting at the same rate, then no, it would balance.
Well,
What's happening? Somebody's yelling questions, or you got cut off. I guess the answer is it depends. So for a lot of systems that have that artesian and the water is coming to the surface under its own pressure, then you have to define how long you think that's gonna last. How long is the artesian pressure gonna maintain itself? And then if you start losing that pressure, you can start re-injecting. But in a closed loop, everything's encased. And so you're just extracting the heat and not the fluids. So you're thinking,
So what I'm
So
saying
you're
is
thinking,
if you drilled your
is it
injection
highly,
well, and your injection well comes back artesian also, you
Uh-huh.
have to overcome the pressure
right,
in that, right? So like, it kind of seems to maybe jump to conclusions, like we're in a situation where you have a lot of artesian pressure flow, where it's maybe a one-way system is more appropriate. And if that's the case, how do you deal with the water incident? I'm probably.
so in the geysers in California, they were relying on that artesian pressure for decades. And then they started losing that artesian system. And so now they bring in treated wastewater and inject it. And so they use the artesian system and the heat and the water hydrothermally to create electricity until their pressure started to drop. And then they started injecting. So I'm not sure what the pressure differential or those kinds of pump pressures and electricity that you would need to maintain that. But that goes into like the whole background of defining the whole system. Where is the water coming from? How fast is it moving through the system? How deep is it? What kind of wells are we gonna drill?
I saw one other question. I can take that, Chris, if you'd like to, and then I'll ask everyone else to hold your questions until the end.
Oh, okay. I think I have like 2 more slides and then we can have.
Yeah, and I think we'll do questions at the very end,
Very
just
end.
not to break up the rest of the flow.
And then.
And Holly's here, so
Yeah.
feel free to chat with her more.
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, no, it was great. Thanks, Alex.
So, and this is about enhanced geothermal, which might be down the road. So maybe in Rico, your low hanging fruit are the direct use applications. District heating, greenhouses,
Snow melt.
snow melt,
Mhm.
this one. Oh, yeah, we're skipping that one. Skip that one. So this, yeah, 2 more slides. Where can geothermal grow? Most hydrothermal systems have been utilized where appropriate. So all of the good spots, the ones that have the plumbing and the water and the heat all together at the same spot. But smaller projects, ground source heat pumps, localized projects like Rico. And then enhanced geothermal might be down the road for the community here for electricity production. And this figure is from GeoVision 2017, again, maybe a little out of date. The graphs on the bottom show where geothermal can grow. And then the graph on the top is just that classic cross section of the Earth's crust. Where are we finding all of those parts together and where can we add to that? Like, where do we add the fracturing? If we don't have fractured bedrock, but we have hot bedrock, can we fracture it? And people are all, don't like the word fracking because they associate it with natural gas extraction. But fracking for hydrothermal or geothermal is just, like you said, keeping that pressure at depth. So your pores stay open. And you don't have to use any other kind of chemicals. And that's all on geothermal 101. So if you have questions, I can talk to you at the end about what I know. But again, like I said, I'm just a little bit not expert.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was great. That was a great intro. Um. So the next presentation that I want to share with everybody is my presentation. Let me get this screen share going.
Oh, I have two other presentations too, so if you're interested. We're on the geology.
And thanks everybody for your patience in this process with me. This is my first time operating all these different technologies with Zoom and videos and yes, and right. Okay, so Rico Geothermal. This is I'm very excited to be sharing with all of you about the project here in our local town and community. Here's a little bit of very simple background on where this all began. After the molybdenum boreholes were drilled and we realized that there was hot water underneath us. Rico has some of the highest identified hydrogeothermal potential in the state. And we have 3 surface springs as a result of those molybdenum boreholes. So it's been on our radar for a while that there is a hot water reservoir underneath this town. And previously, other studies were conducted to get a better understanding of what our hydrogeothermal system looked like. And I mentioned Professor Masami Nakagawa. He and former students partnered with me and presented in March of 2022, and that was the last educational workshop to the community. And their work had been studying these resources, or studying this resource from 2009 to 2018. And then I revitalized the Rico Geothermal effort by creating a new Rico Geothermal Coalition. And that now consists of 6 local residents, our industry partner Tavera, and Western Colorado University. And so we're building on all of the data that has already been collected and then continuing to move this process forward to find out if geothermal solutions are something that the town of Rico is interested in. And so I wanna share with everybody this concept of transparency, because this is a really important foundation for what the Rico Geothermal Coalition is built on. We are doing this effort, it's 100% grassroots, community-led, and our intention is to make use of our hydrogeothermal resource for the benefit of the community. As Skippy mentioned earlier, the Rico Geothermal Coalition is folded under the Rico Land Collaborative nonprofit, and the nonprofit structure allows us to apply for grants and funds and also to build a more expansive network. And the actual vision and implementation of the plan, again, is up to the community. And so the people involved in this effort, the Rico Geothermal Coalition is doing the work for the community. And then we will be connecting with the community directly for your input and your feedback. And we want to understand how this community would like to utilize this resource that we have, which currently isn't being used for anything other than hot springs, that are now privately owned and are only open to locals. Beyond that, we haven't been able to make use of the resource as of yet. So we're trying to explore what other opportunities we might have. And the funding, we most recently were awarded a $100,000 grant fund in May of 2024. This came through the Colorado Geothermal Grant Program, which is part of the Colorado Energy Office. And this funding was created as a result of the reduction or the Inflation Reduction Act to support infrastructure. And then we also received a small grant from the Rico Center to help with the geothermal website build out this year. And those are the funds that we're working with now to create this project or to continue this project. So for this initial funding phase, our funding supports a phase 1 scoping study. And this is an 18-month scoping study that started with our team in October. And this is taking a specific look at our geothermal resource and doing some more mapping, and then also working directly with the town to get more town input. And here's some more details on the scoping study. So Holly already went over direct geothermal use, and that's what district heating would fall under. So district heating is the main use that we're currently exploring in this scoping study, this phase 1 scoping study. And the basic concept is we'd like to see if we can develop a thermal energy network, district heating network, that would heat buildings and residences with hot water and ground source heat. So probably a hybrid system that makes use of our really hot water source, and then also the ground source heat temperatures, which average 55 to 59 degrees. And in this process of doing the scoping study, we will also learn a great deal about our resource, which will help us as a community to better explore other geothermal possibilities. Geothermal is often referred to as a cascading resource, meaning that you can use it for many different scenarios. So an example would be you could run it on a closed loop system in district heating to heat a community, to heat residences, to heat buildings. And then if there's still heat left in that water, maybe you melt snow with it, or maybe you heat greenhouses with it, or maybe there's also a hot springs. So it has all of these different multiple benefits that can be used, you know, depending on the resource. And that's what we want to better understand, is how viable is our resource for multiple uses, starting with district heating. The phase 1 scoping study, I want to share really clearly that what this pays for in this 18-month period is for a scientific team from Tavera. This is our industry partner. They're a subsurface geoscience and engineering company. They will be mapping the reservoir, which has never been done before. We have some data collected on it, but this is going to provide a much more comprehensive picture of what our reservoir actually looks like and where it can be accessed. They'll also be calculating a thermal energy network and the preliminary design for the town of Rico. And then this also pays for the community engagement led by the Rico Geothermal Coalition and myself to host educational events like this, present to the town board, create educational resources and communications. We'll be conducting a very large survey starting in May, and my intention is to survey everybody in Rico. That's my ideal scenario, because why not? There's only 300 of us. And also then engaging local community stakeholders and answering all of your questions and hearing all of your input. So my job in this is to connect with all of you and hear your voice and make sure that that's engaged in this whole process. Near future geothermal goals would be to localize energy. Localizing energy would reduce costs. I'd like to create geothermal solutions that work economically for the town and the residents. So once we get further down the road and we start seeing the economics of this, that will be a really important area for everyone to understand and weigh in on. And I'd like for us to establish a thermal energy network that also helps to educate and create job opportunities locally that supports the town's economics. And this would be, you know, community-led development, essentially. And it's also an opportunity for the town of Rico to consider another economic driver besides tourism that would have less of a market and price inflation effect on the community, which is most commonly associated with tourist exclusive economics. And then of course, moving towards clean energy generation and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which we're just in the time when that's necessary. And As a small town in a deep valley, it's worth taking a look at how we can breathe cleaner air. And that is my presentation. Now I would like to turn it over to some other scientific and engineering experts that we have joining us virtually. And the first person I have the honor of introducing all of you to is Emily Gentry. Emily Gentry is part of the Tavera team. She's a senior geothermal geoscientist with Tavera, and she provides geological mapping, resource assessment, and geothermal conceptual model development. Her technical expertise is structural and subsurface geology with experience in geologic research and oil and gas development, exploration, reservoir characterization, and regulatory affairs management. There's a lot about Emily that I could say. She's been really wonderful to work with so far, and she has helped to connect the dots for me through Masami and through Tavera to keep this project going. She also is personally vested in the sustainability of small mountain towns. Her family has lived in Pagosa Springs for over 15 years. So the San Juan Mountains and the small communities of the surrounding area are very important to her personally and professionally. And Emily, I'll let you share from your side.
Yes, give me 1 quick minute.
No
I have somebody at my door, so give me just 1 quick minute.
problem. Sure.
All right. And then y'all do signs where? You got a nice
Thanks so
weekend.
much. Sorry. Of course, someone comes to my door right as it is my turn to speak. I'm going to keep my camera off just to save the bandwidth, but let me get this going. Here. Okay, you guys can see full screen my slide.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, Teal. Thanks for everyone for being here this morning. I'm excited to be a part of this and be able to talk a little bit about what Tavera has been doing already with this project. So to start off, kind of an outline of what I'm going to go through is speaking more to like what's the current understanding of the geothermal resource in Rico, and then talk about, as part of this project, what are the goals of Tavera's work, as well as what have we done so far, and then where is it heading. So very much a roadmap of where we're at, where we're going. Before I get into that, just to do a very brief, very quick introduction of Tavera. As Teal said, we are a subsurface geoscience and engineering company. We've been around for about 10 years. Our CEO has been doing a lot more with this company even before that 10 years. So Hamid Sarouche is our CEO. And the pictures that I have here are not our whole company, but are the people that will be involved in this project. You'll mostly hear from me because I am Colorado local. I'm up in Golden, Colorado. And as Teal mentioned, I also have family in Pagosa Springs. And so I will be the main one on this project, but you might be hearing from Joe Batier as well, who's our geothermal lead. And then Kylie Baird is our geoscientist as well. And then later after me, you'll hear from Kevin Kitts. He is our consultant professional engineer. So he'll speak more to what he is doing. And just kind of like a goal or vision of what Tavera does, generally speaking, is we're looking at turning reliable clean energy into reality by providing innovative subsurface solutions. So some of that is through consulting, some of that is through technology development, and some of that's working with communities like all of you. So to jump right into what we currently know about Rico. I'm glad that Holly was able to give a good background on geothermal. This will be pretty much speaking to what data we have and what we know, not so much of like what the geothermal background 101 is. So what we have right now is research reports that date from 1976 all the way through about 2016, 2018. So there's a large span of understanding, starting out with mostly mining information. And then in 2009, 2010, 2011 is really where Colorado School of Mines started coming out and doing some research. And I will get into what that looks like in a few slides further down. As I mentioned, a lot of it's just borehole and thermal spring temperature data. That's mining boreholes, and then geochemistry that's associated with that. So geochemistry, it is what it sounds like. It is the chemistry of the water. And from that, you can start to extract different reservoir temperatures. So it is a useful thing to have. And then there's also geophysics that has been completed. And that's what Colorado School of Mines and Masami have really been involved with, is doing resistivity and magnetellurics. I'm not going to go into the detail of what those are, but basically it is imaging of the subsurface to help us understand where there's faults, where there might be a reservoir, where's the fluid flowing, where is the fluid unable to pass, things like that. So some of this is also repeat from what Teal had just talked about, but what the current understanding of Rico is, we have the 3 thermal springs that have temperatures about 40 to 46 degrees Celsius. And then we also have some geochemistry. As I said, from that, you can pull reservoir temperatures. So estimated reservoir temperatures based on that geochemistry is about 120 to 140 degrees Celsius. The difference here between that 40 to 46 and 120 to 140 is the geochemistry is giving us a much deeper subsurface value. So it's not that we're getting 120 at the surface, that is further down in the reservoir. And then, as Holly was mentioning, geothermal gradient for Rico stands out to be higher than anywhere else in the state, really. So to give you an idea of what we have here, the continental average is about 30 degrees Celsius per kilometer. And the Rico average is about 101. So it's significantly higher, which already kind of raises a flag and is something to look into further, right? And I think that's kind of what drove a lot of the initial investigations into the geothermal of Rico. And then along with geothermal gradient, heat flow for Rico is also among the highest in the state. So this map here is a map that Tavera published this year with some additional data, and it's still showing that Rico is a hotspot essentially in amongst the state. I will say the center part is not well data constrained, so and I mentioned that only to say that Rico is still considered high for most of the a hotspot for the state. So data ranging from at least 2011 up through 2024 is still showing more and more that Rico is in a hotspot, for lack of better terms. So then when we look at the geologic framework and trying to understand, we can understand the thermal side, but what does that mean for the reservoir and getting to the reservoir, and what does the reservoir look like, and the system below the subsurface? That's the other component that we need to understand. So right now what's understood is just mapping of the geology, the faults, the rock types. There are published geologic maps. This is pretty well understood. And from that geologic understanding, we can create a geologic evolution, which helps us then understand what the geothermal system looks like. To put that into what those words mean in a picture, this image on the right here is showing where, okay, we have an understanding of what the geology looks like and what exists in Rico. And now let's put together a picture of what that could mean for how geothermal fluids are getting from the subsurface to the surface at shallower depths. So this was presented in 2022 with Masami at the last Geothermal Coalition meeting. And so, yeah, this is the current conceptual model understanding of how the geology and the geothermal fluids kind of play hand in hand. Okay, and then I know this slide is kind of busy, but I will walk through it. So the last component of what we currently know about the Rico resource is the geophysics, which helps us get an idea of what the reservoir geometry could be. So in 2010, 2016, and 2018, Colorado School of Mines came out and took different geophysics geophysical studies. And you can see those I've outlined 2010, 2016, 2018. And these were all different locations, different lines within Rico with different intentions as well to understand where certain faults, where certain extents of the reservoir would exist, with the intention to understand where permeability, which is in short fluid pathways, and where the water flows in the subsurface. And so what these studies gave were a new understanding of where the reservoir extends. So, it extends from this fault to this fault, but doesn't go further east or west. I am making that up, so don't quote me on that, but that's what I mean by reservoir extents, and then the reservoir depth. And so the resistivity results in 2010 and 2016 gave an understanding of the geometry of the reservoir. So exactly what I was just saying, based on specific faults, they reported saying, this is where the extent of the reservoir is, and it cuts off at the last chance fault. So what faults serve as fluid pathways versus what faults are serving as barriers or boundaries. With that, there was also an understanding with hydrology, where the water flows and how it flows through the system and how that regenerates within the subsurface system from the surface to the subsurface and kind of cycling through that. Then in 2018, they did an MT, a magnetotelluric study, which was to really understand deeper results to get an idea of how deep that reservoir is. So the results from that show that the reservoir is less than 1,000 meters deep at the hot spring location, and then it extends to continue north to south. So that's kind of what came out of previous work that has been done. So part of the study and the grant that Teal talked about is to continue to piece together what that looks like. So we know where to drill and where to put in the best location of a well. So the goals of Tavera's work is to, let me take a step back. So the geophysics that was done are indirect measurements of that permeability and the water flow. So all of this gives us a really good idea, but they're not direct measurements, right? And so it does give us a good picture of what the resource looks like and what the reservoir is, to say that there's high potential, but it's not good enough to really like hang your hat on. It's not good enough to understand the depth and the breadth of the geothermal reservoir. And it's not good enough to say, let's put a well in right here. So what we really need to do is kind of bring in all these different pieces together, and then eventually test everything with a borehole, which is what that scope 1 or scope 2, I guess, will be of that study. So what we're doing to get to that point is, like I said, integrate all this existing data. We're not collecting any new data currently for this phase 1, but we are bringing everything into a model and then synthesizing what that means together. So what does the temperature data mean? What does the fault data mean? What's the geophysical data mean? And if we put that all together, what kind of story and understanding can we get of the subsurface? So the work is still ongoing right now for what we are doing. So I can't give too much of a new conclusion or analysis. We just started this like 2 months ago. So I will have results hopefully next town hall meeting. But currently we are creating a model that brings all those components together. with the idea to select a target location for a well. And with that, we want to select the most optimal location based on the geometry of the reservoir, so understanding its extents and its depth, as well as the characteristics of the reservoir, meaning the permeability, the water flow, all that sort of stuff. And then finally, the best location for all of you, for the community. So bringing in these different components to understand. So this image here is kind of a starting image of what I have for the model we're building. In this slide, I know it's kind of pixelated, unfortunately, but so this will walk through, I think it's about a minute long, and I'll talk through it as it's playing, but this will show where we are right now, and hopefully we'll give you an idea of how we're integrating everything. So we've taken, this is just a geologic map. I think this was published in the 60s with cross sections. And so from that, here I'm showing faults. So I've picked out different faults that extend into the subsurface and create these different boundaries within Rico. These align with the cross sections, as you can see, kind of spinning it around, bringing in geologic interpretation of where different faults intersect. And from there and the cross sections, we can then start to put the geology with it. And so you can start to see how we're getting a deeper understanding of what the subsurface would look like in 3D versus just having, the geophysical studies. So then as we step through this is kind of like cutting through the cake almost. As you can see, we have different geological changes, different faults interacting. This is by no means a final product. There's still some edits to be made, but the idea is to be able to understand what is in the subsurface, where's our faults, where would the fluid flow up. And so this is basically the end product for right now. Once we bring in the geophysical aspects, the temperature data is going to be integrated next. Then we can start seeing, along this fault, the geophysical study said that this was where fluid was flowing up. We have temperatures of such and such here. So the best drill location would be here and into this rock type at this depth. So that's kind of where it is heading. So next steps that I am currently working on is refining that geology and then incorporating all those components. Like I said, the geophysics, the conceptual model based on the geophysics. And what that means is Masami has, from all his geophysical studies, has said, this is where the hot fluid is flowing up. This is the extent, these boundaries are constraining the reservoir and such and such. So bringing that into my 3D model, incorporating the thermal data, so the geothermal gradient points as well as the hot spring data, refine that conceptual model based on what we have brought into it, and then from there select a drill location. And that's all I have. So do you want me to take questions now, or you're waiting completely till the end?
I'm gonna wait till the end.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. That was great.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, we are going to take a quick 5 to 10 minute break because I need to swap out my computer. I only have 2 ports, and so I'm not able to be plugged into a charger because I have to be plugged into this microphone and video in the middle and this screen up here, and I have a backup computer over here. So everybody on Zoom, my apologies, please log back on. In minutes, I'll have the Zoom link up again, but I need to close out for a minute and let everyone take a bathroom break and grab some refreshments, and then we'll come back. But don't go anywhere, stay here because we're gonna have a district heating presentation next, which will really bring all of this together for what the vision is. So thank you for your patience.